Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hello. We're going to get started here. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Manufacturing and the Road to Decarbonization event. Thank you for being here. I'm Alison Snyder. I'm one of the managing editors at Axios, and I'm joined by our first guest, Katie McGinty, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at Johnson Controls, which specializes in building technology, including energy-efficient heating, cooling, energy retrofits, and sustainable design. She's also a former federal and state environmental policy official, including in the very best state of Pennsylvania, which we are both from. And go Eagles! Did actually, sorry, really quick. Did they win yesterday?
Yes, they did.
Okay,
Yes, they did.
I should know that.
Fly, Eagles, fly.
So this afternoon, we're going to be exploring the intersection of manufacturing and the progress toward clean energy transitions across a variety of businesses. So let's get started here. And I want to start with Johnson Controls. Can you talk a little bit about what are some of the most misunderstood or sort of underrepresented aspects of where buildings fall in terms of being the top emitters in the world?
No, totally. Well, it's good to see everybody. Happy Davos. So buildings, yeah, I think when we all think about climate and climate action, we go immediately to solar, wind, electric vehicles, and thank goodness for all the progress we've seen in that space. But maybe not enough known fact, buildings represent actually 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And so in terms of zero decarbonizing the climate unless we decarbonize those buildings. You know, the cool stuff happens inside buildings. We go in, we run our businesses, we live our lives, we have our sporting activities, whatever it is. Nobody thinks too much about the bricks and mortar. But there is good news associated with the bad news that is the 40% figure. Okay. And that is that we do have the technology today to totally turn that around, and it's a trifecta of efficiency, electrification, and digitalization. That's what we can put to work for not only net zero, but net energy positive buildings.
So what's making the biggest dent?
You know, I think you need every single piece of that equation. And let me just start with the efficiency piece. So it's always been the least charismatic, energy or environmental tool. Having spent a little bit of my life in the political world, it's like, how do you invite people to the ribbon cutting for efficiency? The absence. However, one, the technology is making the space much more cool, like heat pumps on the electrification piece. But also, when we're all struggling with how do we make climate action stick and stay against economic cycles and political cycles, efficiency's got to be number one. Why? Because it dramatically reduces emissions while dropping cash to the bottom line. You're cutting costs as well. So you asked me for the biggest one. I want to come back to heat pumps, but if I had to pick one, the real revolution coming to buildings is in data and digital. Okay. And I'm not just saying that because AI is the thing of Davos and I want buildings to be in there. But we know in COVID, for example, the height of the lockdowns. So 80% reduction in occupancy in commercial buildings, but we only saw a 20% reduction in energy consumption because buildings are basically pretty dumb bricks of mortar, totally analog, and man, big on-off switch. You turn them off, bad stuff happens. The pipes freeze and a lot of bad stuff happens. The reverse is, as we put data to work, and a little advertisement, so in Johnson Controls, our end-to-end digital platform's called OpenBlue, harnessing AI, one building, just to give one example, 1 million data points a minute that we're processing. And what does it do? It understands electricity prices, it understands outside temperature, it understands indoor air quality, and boom, enables you to have that building become like a battery, dramatically cutting emissions, costs, and even being able to sell energy back to the grid.
So if that's the case, why are so few companies doing it? Why are so few people doing it?
I will say, I think honestly, our biggest challenge, maybe this is back to the, not so charismatic, it's about mind share. You know, the breaking through, when we at Johnson Controls show up in a building, they're like, oh, you're the Johnson Controls, you're the HVAC people. There's the elevator, you push B for basement, not for boardroom. And so it's when we can sit down, though, in the C-suite and take the conversation to a strategic level and have a conversation that says, what's top of mind for you? And what CEOs will tell you right now, it is capital preservation, it is hardening themselves against a potential trade war, reliability, uptime, runtime of their assets. And they are like pencils down, heads down against that. If you can get 2 seconds, though, to say, hey, if that's the case, if you lean into decarbonization, you're solving for all of those outcomes. And just one example is from our own facilities. And this is a little bit of, this is just amongst us, right? So one of our big factories is in Norman, Oklahoma. It's the second biggest energy consumer in our fleet. And as we've dramatically reduced our Scope 1 and 2 emissions, it's like, okay, the next big horizon is massively to upgrade some of our biggest workhorse factories. We got in there, and 2 things were true. One, it was a must-run factory, but it had 60-year-old equipment in it, and that was the risk to operations because it was breaking down. But second, to get at the cash-flowing, carbon-reducing efficiency measures, we wound up staring at $30 million of deferred maintenance. But here's the trick in terms of then, so why doesn't a CEO run away from that? They don't want, who has $30 million around? But the energy efficiency gains are so great, we achieved that upgrade with the efficiency paying the entire capital costs, cutting our emissions 43%, dropping $960,000 a year in reduced operating costs for that facility. And for a must-run facility, it now has state-of-the-art, most advanced operating equipment. So the story is real, and the technology delivers. It's just capturing C-suite time to elevate this from a compliance discussion, or it's the environment, it's climate. Well, that's the feel-good department. Go talk to our social responsibility people, to a strategic competitive advantage conversation. When we get a chance, we have the examples, I think, to drive home the opportunity.
So electrification is a big part of this, right? You mentioned it. I mean, like, how effective can that be if the power for that that's driving that is coming from coal and natural gas? Like, I mean, the new U.S. administration wants that. How effective can it be?
Well, that is obviously for electrification of building systems, heating space, hot water, as well as electrification of transportation. The ultimate source of those electrons is critically important. Yeah, I do think you have some pendulum swinging right now. I do think, however, in the face of that, you do have some fundamental economics where the relative cost points and the least cost of energy has some staying power in driving the generating choice towards cleaner and cleaner sources. I also think, by the way, a little detour, but on the AI energy equation, you know, the inventiveness and the don't ask for permission, I'll apologize after kind of attitude of the colos and the hyperscalers bringing new energy, clean energy resources into the mix is going to change what that order is in the queue in our electrical system. But here's the reason why heat pumps and electrification of building systems is so critical. 2 reasons. One is in conventional heating systems or cooling, you can maybe get, high water mark, 85% efficient, so you're still throwing away 15% of the energy it takes in order to achieve the heating or cooling. With heat pumps, and I know you're a chemical engineer, so this is going to test your real knowledge of physics. But you actually are achieving many multiples of workable energy on the back end than you put in on the front end, and it doesn't violate the rules of physics. The trick is that typically, instead of conventional cooling would pull the heat out of this room and just dissipate it, probably also destroying a lot of water to evaporate that heat away, the heat pump grabs that thermal energy and puts it back to work. So you get another turn of the dial in heating another space, or in process heat in manufacturing, or in heating water. And so some of our projects, we literally achieve 10, 11 times the workable energy on the back end as you need to drip in on the front end.
I want to go just sort of big picture. And some of these large-scale energy infrastructure transitions, it requires a lot of public-private partnerships. You obviously have a lot of experience in that. And so I'm wondering, how worried are you about the sort of continued viability of those and then over the next 4 years in the U.S., obviously?
Well, first, I just want to validate that that public-private partnership is absolutely vital. Mm-hmm. So, we're at kind of the best of times, worst of times in climate action right now. We've never seen government step up as decidedly in terms of mobilizing resources and incentives. At the same time, we've got some geopolitical headwinds as well. But when you look at the numbers of what is really required in order to achieve that energy transition, and you've seen numbers like $4 trillion a year of financing gap, that's got to involve mobilizing private sector dollars together with public sector dollars. I guess I'll share in the U.S. context anyway with the Inflation Reduction Act. I do have a sense of hope about that. Okay. And it comes from just enough of the tick of the clock from the passage of the IRA, going from words on a page to steel in the ground. Mm-hmm. And there's enough of that steel in the ground now in every kind of major infrastructure project, chip manufacturing projects, et cetera, that while it was only Democrats who voted for the legislation, a lot of that job opportunity and economic growth has happened in red states as well. And I think there was not too long ago 18 Republican members of Congress who wrote to say, hey, go hunting elsewhere for reducing costs and leave the IRA alone.
It is interesting, though, a lot of the things that I think here in Davos that have been on the agenda for a long time, including ESG, there's sort of been a political backlash to them, right? In the case of sustainability, there was sort of consumer-driven pressure, and it sort of carried it through even the first Trump presidency. Do you think it'll last a second one?
I do think that spotlighting. I don't think anything is a foregone conclusion for sure. But two things also I think are true. One, I do believe that there is a growing number of those C-suites I'm referring to who do see, and I get a little cheeky with this, that ESG is JGB. It's just good business. If you're thinking about it right, if you've put your tiger team on it, just like people were doing with AI, where they're putting their best and brightest, what's in it for me in this climate change thing? How do I make this work for my company? And what they're saying is this, reduce operating costs, increase the reliability of my operations, help me attract and retain the best and the brightest out there. So that's the optimistic piece that I do think we will continue to lean into forward momentum. There's a not so optimistic piece, but it solves for the same direction, I think, and that is that Mother Nature is shaking her fist pretty darn hard. And you're out of business if you can't get insurance, and there are increasing number of places around the United States and the world you can't get insurance. And I think that is real as rain, to people who are putting balance sheets together and trying to finance their businesses. There hopefully will increasingly be inherent business-driven momentum because it's just a physical reality that this has to be dealt with.
We're almost out of time, but we end here with one fun thing. And I made the mistake last time of assuming that it was not someone's first Davos. So is this your first Davos?
It is not my second. And then after a hiatus of about 25 years when I was here the first time.
Oh, wow. When you were...
Okay, it might have been 30.
So what's your big piece of advice for how to make it through the week? Especially, you were here in a very different capacity 25 years ago, right?
I was indeed. Yes, I was in the Clinton White House and was here for some... then it was... what was it? I was one of the global leaders for tomorrow. I'm hoping I'm not a global leader for yesterday at this point. I think Mother Nature's smiling on us. Otherwise, my only advice would have been those crampon things that they give you. Wear them.
Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. Thank you again. And so everybody stay right here. Up next is going to be a word from our sponsor. So thank you. And Nick Johnson.
Thanks, Alison.
Sorry.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon. I'm Nicholas Johnston. I'm the publisher of Axios. Thanks you much for being here, joining us at Davos again this year. We're very grateful for all of our partners who helped make this possible. Big thanks to Qualcomm for hosting us here, and huge thanks to U.S. Steel for making this conversation possible. And so already up on stage with me is U.S. Steel's head of sustainability, Erica Chan, a second-time Axios guest. Good evening, afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Nick, and thanks for having us again. It's
welcome
really great to be
back.
here.
Let's start big picture. So there's so many 3 or 4 month old startups crammed into Davos, and then you look at U.S. Steel, very different pedigree and lineage. Give us a little sense of, from a big picture standpoint, like why this decarbonization conversation is important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I think you might know what we do because it's in our name, but just in case you don't, we manufacture steel primarily in the U.S. and Central Europe. And we also have iron ore mining in the U.S. as well, and we have research centers. So we've got about 20,000 people across 24 locations. And we were founded in 1901. So no, we're not a startup, but we do have the mentality of a startup, I think, the constant learning and innovating. And I've been here since 2022, so quite not the tenor of some of my colleagues, but in that time, I came from technology, so I used to work at Dell Technologies, so it was quite a learning curve to come from technology to steel. And there's so many fascinating things about steel that I think that people may not know. So for instance, steel is infinitely recyclable, and it's the #1 most recycled material in the world. So when it's recyclable, it's infinitely recyclable, but it doesn't degrade any of its properties, it still retains it. Also, just a fun fact for you here, I'm going to throw you a question, Nick. What 5 things do you own that have steel in them?
A car.
Yes.
I mean, this is a trick question. Oh, you're going to punk me here. A refrigerator. I think my dishwasher has it. We talked about this. I have a champagne saber. It's a very Davos answer, but I think that's best.
I think it depends where it was made, but yes, that could have steel in it.
I think that's 5.
All right, it's close enough. It's close enough. So steel basically is in almost everything, right? So whether you own a car or ride in an Uber, if you have a refrigerator or a dishwasher, washing machine, if you like to cook, there are kitchen appliances that have.
Okay, there you go. That's the other one.
That's the other one. Yeah, number five. Good old sand mixer.
I mean, let's get back to, I think, the ubiquity of it, but I want to take a little detour first and talk a little bit back to the sustainability issue here. Like, how do you track that? How do you measure that? Like, what are the metrics that you pay attention to?
Yeah. So I think the #1 metric that we have is that we have announced a 2050 goal. We did so a few years ago, and we were the first American steel company to set one. It's a Scope 1 and Scope 2 net zero goal by 2050. We also have an interim goal, which is to reduce our emissions by 20% by 2030. And we're well on track towards that goal. We achieved a 19.6 reduction so far. So we published that in our June 2024 report based on 2023 data. So that is our #1 goal right now, is to focus on decarbonization in addition to being a good steward of the planet and having environmental excellence as part of our strategy or business.
We talk about all the things that steel is in. So those are customers of yours who are buying that. What do you hear from your customers as far as this as a topic?
Yeah, so we hear often from our customers, right? Our customers have sustainability goals just like we do, right? Whether you're in the automotive industry or construction, there are varying degrees of, I think, ambition. We also see varying degrees of ambition according to geography as well. So in Europe, you see a lot more regulation driving some of the goals that people are setting, companies are setting. And in the US, we work with companies like GM who have their own ambitious goals to produce EVs, to lower their emissions and their footprint. And so because steel is such a large part of a car, we're a part of enabling that greener economy.
How does that work in the supply chain from as a form of collaboration? They're just not buying it off the shelf. They're probably talking to you as a supplier and trying to align those. I mean, how do you talk to your customers to make it a more holistic approach?
So I mean, we definitely bring customers in at the design stage, right?
Yeah.
Because depending on what their goals are. So for instance, if you are in the automotive industry and you want to lightweight for efficiency your cars, then we'll develop advanced high-strength steels for you as an automotive customer. And then for those who have EVs, we utilize non-grain-oriented electrical steel, and so that actually helps provide like greater range for electric vehicles. So it's really important, I think, that we focus on the fact that there is a future still with EVs. You know, you've seen a lot of writing that there's all this, you know, obituaries on EVs, but, you know, we're still very optimistic about being able to provide companies, automotive companies, the steel that they need. And in fact, about 60% of, 60% of appliances actually contain steel, but also with cars, you know, it's over 50% of steel in cars.
And because it's such a big part, you bring them in as customers to, I guess, like fine-tune the processes and their needs to hit those kinds of decarbonization goals. So take us a little bit, what was interesting, I thought Katie mentioned before, the Just Good Business acronym she had. How does that fit into your worldview, where it's not, you don't view ESG goals as separate from the operation of the business? Where do they intersect?
Yeah. No, it's very much a business imperative. In fact, I think I might steal that from her. I like the JGB acronym.
Yes.
And as we know, ESG is getting a little bit of flack, so well, maybe we'll just all call it JGB from now on. Yeah, you know, it's very much part of our strategy, right? Because we think about the market opportunity in a greener economy. We think about clean tech, right? Like solar. We think about electric vehicles. We think about also a more resilient supply chain and infrastructure. So all of that kind of comes together. And so when we work with our customers and how we integrate it into our longer term efforts and strategy, you know, we start again at the beginning of the discussions with the customers, but then we also develop, you know, customized steel. So a specific car, right, wants to have a certain property, then we work with them and we, like in the appliance industry, for instance, we'll use like 25% recycled steel as a minimum and the total weight of the 60% of steel in an appliance. So if you think about that, making sure that steel has a lower carbon footprint, making sure it can meet and enable a customer's sustainability goals is really
I
important.
mean, that carbon footprint goal is the flip side of the same coin on the bottom line goal then. So how does this continue? It's like what are the partnerships that are needed? How can folks in this room help contribute to that? What are you looking at over the horizon to keep this going?
Yeah. So absolutely. So for those of you in the room who are at startup stage and you have some really cool decarbonization technology that maybe has gone, I don't know, at 3 to 4 months, you probably haven't gone out of the lab stage, but we'll still talk to you, right? We're still open to evaluating. But those, you know, who have, you know, some funding, who've gone to maybe more larger scale, operational type, you know, commercial scale, very interested in talking to you with technology specifically to decarbonize. And we actually have a partnership with Carbon Free. So they are a company that takes our emissions from a Gary Works facility. We announced a partnership that we're going to be starting with them. So they'll take the emissions and convert it into carbon neutral calcium carbonate. So for those of you who are not familiar with calcium carbonate, that can be used in a variety of applications from paint to PVC plumbing, as well as food grade applications like pills. So the pharmaceutical industry can use that.
And then where's the role for policymakers here as a partner in this?
Yeah, so absolutely. I think that, you know, the policies that we see in Europe are driving a lot of change, but also a lot of reporting for companies like ours. And then in addition, in the US, you know, with the IRA, that really spurred a lot of investment.
It was a huge topic last year when we were here. Absolutely.
Exactly. Spurred a lot of investment both in maybe green hydrogen development as well as specific decarbonization for iron and steel.
All right, so as Alison mentioned, we like to end on one fun thing. You get the same question. You are a Davos sophomore. This is your second
That is
time.
correct.
Did you learn any lessons last time to help you power through your return this week?
I did. The crampons are very, very important. But I think the second thing is that, you know, I meet so many interesting people when I'm here, and I just really, really value and love the connections that I make that help me throughout the rest of the year and future conversations.
This is the most competitive meeting environment I've ever been in. Everybody wants to meet and talk, so live it up then,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Erica, thank you so much for being here. Huge thanks to US Steel for being
Thank
with
you.
us again this year. I'm going to bring my colleague Alison back up to finish the conversation.
Right. So our final guest this afternoon is Pedro Gomez. He is the head of climate. I like this very succinct title, head of climate at the World Economic Forum and a member of the forum's executive committee. So thank you for being here, Pedro. And I want to start by asking you, you work with organizations and companies all over the world, so I want to hopefully get a sense of what you're seeing. And if you could share like an example, I guess, of a successful decarbonization initiative, our focus here is in manufacturing, that you think could serve as a model for other industries or in other places.
Thank you, Alison, and good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all here in Davos. Perhaps I'll start by saying a bit of what I see in today's environment. We are living in a world that is different than let's say it was, if you remember Glasgow. Just before the COP, there was perhaps a different sentiment. Now we have a different geopolitical situation, different economic situation. But at the same time, we have a lot of opportunity. Right? So it's a different world, but we need to adapt, and we need to make sure that the actions that we support, the actions that we facilitate, the communities, the coalitions that we curate are cognizant of the different situations that we're facing. Now, you mentioned one successful example, and maybe what I would like to focus is on, perhaps you've heard of the First Movers Coalition. It's a group of companies. We started back in Glasgow. There were 35 of us, 35 companies, one government, and this has quickly evolved. And today there's 105 companies that are participating in this coalition, and they are sending probably the largest demand signal to support the development of emerging decarbonization technologies. We are working on the sectors that are called hard to abate or heavy emitting sectors, depending on who you ask. Aviation, shipping, trucking, steel, aluminum, cement, and concrete. I think this is quite successful, and you heard the numbers, 105 companies. Now they have 125 commitments. But perhaps the most important thing is that in the year 2030, all of these commitments will represent an aggregate demand of $16 billion a year that will be supporting the development of decarbonization technologies. I think that's the match is not over. We still need to push through. Now we have 13 governments that are working with this coalition. And just in the panel before, I heard, what is the role of policymakers? They have a role to play. This is a team sport, so it's not only about the private sector, it's not only about the governments, it's not only about us as end consumers. We all need to be playing together. The issues that we are working on are quickly evolving, they're dynamic, and if we want to solve this in isolation, the reality is that we will not probably make a dent in one of the greatest challenges we're facing.
You mentioned a couple of industries in particular. What do you think are sort of the emerging technologies that you see potentially making a dent in those heavy to abate or hard to abate heavy industries?
Well, there are different technologies, right? So let me take, for example, the example of aviation. In the aviation sector, there is perhaps more consensus of what needs to happen or what is the technology that needs to be evolving the faster so that it can decarbonize more effectively and it can also create business effectively, and that is sustainable aviation fuels. But there we have a challenge. We need probably, the idea is to have probably 10% of all the aviation fuel to be sustainable aviation fuel by the year 2030, and we are not there yet. So we need all the help we can get in order for that to happen.
Where are we?
Probably we're about 2%.
Okay.
So we need to accelerate. But this applies, I think, in every aspect of decarbonization where we're tackling climate. Nothing requires us to be slower. Everything needs for us to be working together. And again, this is a team sport. We all need to be working together, meeting us where we are. The context is different, and we need to make sure that we have a North Star to follow. But certainly, taking it also, the combination of day by day is also important.
On the train here this morning, I overheard a conversation. It was actually about decarbonization, and there were a couple of people talking, and they were saying, "Oh, that's all well and good if you're a big company. It's great to hear what they're doing, but what about us? How do we do this?" So, how do smaller companies even begin to think about this? Like, how to finance it? What the incentives are?
Well, this is certainly a question that is critical, and it's present in the minds of I think in many of the minds of the global company CEOs. For example, we have this community that we call the Alliance of CEO Climate Leaders, 130 companies that are working on decarbonization. They are probably the most avant-garde companies on this space, but they are clear on one thing. Whatever impact they have is nothing if they don't bring their supply chains, if they don't bring the smaller companies along. So they are working together with them as well. They have that responsibility. They see the opportunity as well. They see that if they want to decarbonize the so-called Scope 3, they need to bring the smaller players along. Sometimes they require more help, sometimes they require less help, but I think it's important to bring them all along in this journey. Supply chains are definitely, and maybe just one final word, they are also not necessarily present in the developed parts of the world. They're also in the developing markets, and we need to make sure that everyone is involved.
I was just going to ask you about that, given your role, but also Katie McGinty was just here and was talking about, she mentioned the $4 trillion gap it's required for climate financing. So I'm curious about the new collective quantified goal that was agreed upon in, November. And sort of how you see that, what role or impact that might have in manufacturing in the near future.
Well, last year was the year of climate finance, and if you remember, COP29 in Baku was labeled the financial COP. And one of the key objectives was to agree on this NCQG, the new collective quantified goal on finance. We reached an agreement as a global society, 300 billion. It's a big number. Nevertheless, it's probably not enough for what we need to do. But I think one of the ways to think about it is that, again, it's not only for the governments to put the money. We need the private sector to also to be part of this, the private or climate finance. So it's not going to be easy, but we need all the private climate, but we need the bankers, we need the investors, but we also need the companies that will be investing to implement this in their own processes.
What other global strategies are needed? And well, let me start there.
Global strategies for
decarbonization of manufacturing in particular, sorry, there's a context.
Well, manufacturing is definitely one of the strategies, but energy transition is probably where we have been focusing a lot of the energy. It's critical that we, as in COP28, one of the outcomes was to transition away from fossil fuels. We need to do that. Energy transition is critical. We need to make sure that it's done at what we call following the energy triangle. Energy transition needs to be sustainable, for sure, but it also needs to create energy security and at the same time needs to promote sustainable development, economic growth as well.
I'm going to ask you a question similar to the one I asked Katie as well, which is sort of, market-driven sustainability. It survived the first Trump presidency, but as you sort of look to the global commitment for the next 4 years, do you think it's resilient enough to survive another?
Well, I think there are some forces that are very difficult to stop. There's also many companies out there that are making fantastic business by going green. Again, going back to the example of the Alliance of CEO Climate Leaders, it's a group that in the past few years, they have managed to reduce their carbon intensity by 12%, their emissions in absolute terms by 10%, and at the same time, they have increased their productivity or growth by 18%. So it can be done. It's not always easy. And I think this is an important message. It's not, this journey is not an easy journey, but very few things that are worth in life are easy doing, right? So we need to concentrate our energy. We need to be all working together. And in many cases, the opportunities are there. In other cases, we need to look for them a bit more thoroughly, but there's opportunities to be climate smart, to be business smart, and cost smart, as one of the CEOs says frequently.
You must hear a lot of these conversations, again, all over the place, all over the world, with many different stakeholders. What is not being talked about? What's being left out that is important or being overlooked?
I don't know if there's anything that is particularly overlooked. One of the things that I would like to see more, perhaps I will focus on that, is the interplay of the different actors and the interplay of how we need to adapt to every situation, to every partner. It's not the same to discuss this in Europe as it's not the same to discuss this in my home country of Mexico. Mm-hmm. We need to make sure that we're always adapting the discussion so that we identify the opportunities, the incentives that are relevant in each geography. Sometimes we tend, and I'm a culprit of this perhaps, to generalize a bit too much, but I think it's something that I'm trying to remind myself frequently.
We're almost out of time, but you came just at the end here, so I don't know if you caught this, but we tend to ask somebody one fun thing at the end of every segment. I feel really lucky because you're like an insider, so I'm so curious, like what is something that all the insiders in WEF know about Davos and about this week that the rest of us should know?
Well, we know where the best bathrooms are inside the Congress
There we
Center.
go. Okay. So, and
No, listen, no.
I'm not gonna give it up. This might be the.
I'm gonna keep it to the staff.
that's fair.
No, listen, this is a fantastic opportunity for us. We take every moment. We see this as an opportunity, but equally as a responsibility. We have the opportunity to speak to so many of you. And yeah, let's hope that we make the most out of this week.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, everyone, for coming this afternoon. There will be events throughout the week, so we hope to see you again. Take care.
Thank you.
Sorry, I can't shake your hand there. Thank you.